Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be doing the Soviets Elites tier list. So, if you've watched any of my other tier lists before, you know that this is how I'm going to be doing my rankings. S tier is just for strictly broken cards. A cornerstone slash top notch, so either cornerstone cards in powerful decks that aren't necessarily good in every deck, or just cards that are good enough to put into essentially every deck, regardless of archetype, however, are not quite reaching broken levels. B, good but not auto-include, so you might actually be surprised to see a lot of cards that commonly see play in B tier, just because they are good now, because there aren't better options, or there's it is often just usually that there's not better options currently in the game, and these cards will likely not continue to see play as future expansions come out and better cards replace them. C tier is just weak cards. You will still see some cards that will have seen some competitive play, either recently or a long time ago, in there, because again, there is just sometimes where it is a very weak, but it accomplishes a very specific goal that is otherwise not able to be accomplished, or just only able to be accomplished with terrible cards. So you take the weak card over the terrible card. Um, and then finally, D tier is just absolutely terrible cards that you should never run, or cards that are good in a specific type of deck which does not have any of the other cards to support it. So, when we come to Soviets, I would argue that Soviets might actually have the best elites in the game. It's a pretty tough contest. Britain, Germany, Soviets are all up there. Sucks to be US and Japan, but that's just the truth. Um, but I do want to make very clear before I start getting into the tier list itself, this is not a crafting guide. So, oftentimes, an S tier card will be a very, very good recommendation to craft. However, this is not a crafting guide. This is not the order in which you should spend your wild cards if you're looking for elites, because something might be the best elite in the game in a deck which needs like 8 other elites to be playable competitively. Whereas, for example, Feigned Retreat is not necessarily the best elite in the game on its own. However, it is the elite that will have the largest impact on your collection. As a single crafting, for example. So, again, take this with a grain of salt. This is not a strict crafting guide for new players. Um, so, starting off strong, we have the first rifles, and this is going to be S tier. This is going to be number 1 in S tier. I think this is easily the best elite in the game, not in terms of total value, but just in terms of just raw strength on 4. If you play this card on turn 4, you're probably going to win like 75% of the time, which is just strictly not the case for any other card that costs 4 that you could play on 4. Like, this card is absolutely insane. It's genuinely mind-boggling that this card has not been nerfed since it was released. Well, I mean, this card did not release this way. It was changed to be this strong back when Soviets were unplayable, and this is a large part of why Soviets became playable, because this card is just absolutely insane. It is going to be run in essentially every Soviet deck until the end of time, with a few exceptions, like maybe an Ardy kind of deck. Although even at the end, Ardy was starting to experiment with first rifles along with Cossacks. Like, that's how strong this card is. Ardy was considering also running first rifles with Zhukov Cossacks. So, yeah, this card is insane. What else can you say about it? It's like 6-9 in stats for 4, and it's split across 2 bodies, so they can't even just, like, I don't know, Dechima it to take it all out at once. This card's insane. Then we have another S tier card, the 272nd Guards. Now, this card is a lot slower, but it is ridiculously broken for the same reason. It's just generating way too much value for a card which is not bad. Now, if these cards did not have guard, they would be a lot worse, because your opponent can just go face and ignore them. And it's up to you to sort of gain value out of it. Or, for example, a card like T60, where it does have guard, however, the unit it generates does not appear on the board, it goes to your hand. So T60 will generate you a lot of value over the course of a game, however, it does not give you tempo. You play in a 4-cost 2-4 tank guard, which is not great. That is very, very poor stats. A 2-4 tank guard is worth, like, it's probably worth around 2 to 3 credits. You would not play it for 3 credits in your deck. So you're playing 4 credits for like a 2 credit card that probably wouldn't see play at 2 credits, but you're getting a card to your hand that you will later use because you've just generated a free card. However, these summon the card on the board, which is insane. Like, First Rifles is a 3 cost card of stats with for 1 extra cost, you are summoning a second 3 cost card worth of stats. 272nd, it's maybe like a 4 to 5 cost, well, like a 5 cost card of stats, and you're paying 3 extra credits to gain the Death Rattle, summon a 10/10 elite. Like, sorry, a 10 cost 8/8 elite. It's a ludicrously powerful card on value, and because it has guard, you're not just going to get raced down. This is single-handedly has pushed Soviets to the top of control, the sort of top of the control meta, because 272nd guards is just so difficult to deal with, because if you're slamming another threat, so for example, if you're just slamming a Persian, or if you just slam the Joseph Stalin on its own, and your opponent has like a Lion for a day, or they have a Decima, or they have an Avenger or a B-17, any of these cards, and they just remove it, and you've gone 1 for 1. They might even have gained some tempo if they removed it with a unit. However, the 272nd, it's really difficult to remove both bodies at once. And if you just leave it around, a 6/6 is gonna start farming your units. You're trying to control when the Death Rattle spawns, the Destruction effect, because you don't want your opponent to have the opportunity to attack with the 8/8 Heavy Armor 2 1 Operation Tank, because that's insane. However, if you leave it around too much, there is the worries that your opponent has Red Banner and they spawn 2 8/8 Heavy Armor 2 tanks. In which case, again, if it's difficult to remove a 6/6 and then an 8/8, it's just as difficult to remove 2 8/8s. So yeah, this card is absolutely insane. Plus, you can generate it with like you can Red Banner 6 drop into it. You can Ural Factories 7 drop into it. Yeah, you can play Red Banner or Ural Factories on it to get 2 units. This card is just insane. Then we have the new elite. I don't actually remember its name off the top of my head. It's like 13th Rifle, something like that. This card I have not played with a lot, and I have not played against a lot, so I don't know. I'm not confident enough at the moment to put it into S tier, just because I have not played with it a lot. I'm not saying this is not S tier worthy, but I'm gonna leave it in A just because I'm not gonna like go out on a limb here and say this card is S tier, and then just play with it more and realize maybe it's not. So yeah, this card's absolutely insane though. I have no idea why they released this card. This card is ludicrous. The deployment effect is gain control of an enemy unit that costs 2 or less, and that's a permanent gain control, and it can attack on the turn you take over. If you have the operation cost, or the credits for the operation cost, of course. This swings so many matchups in favor. Against self-damage, you can take over 456, regardless of its stats. I know I've played self-damage a lot last season, and I had to start playing around this card no matter what against Soviet control, because if they just take over a 7/9 456th, it's not like Confusion where they have to have a second card to then kill it once they trade with it. They just take it over permanently. This is a huge help in air, because you can either take the bombers you are otherwise nearly impossible for you to deal with, or you can take the fighters to then kill the bombers or stop the bombers from attacking. You can take Paraseed to break the pincer. You can take the unit that was Paraseed to break the pincer. This card helps in the matchups that Soviet control was weakest in a ludicrously powerful and swingy way. Yeah. If you can't tell, Soviets is my favorite nation in the game. However, I think all 3 of these cards should never have been released in the way that they are, and maybe with the case of 272nd, you can leave it as is, but I think the other 2 should definitely be changed in the future. Then we get to a not-so-good card. We have the 6th Airborne, I believe, is what this card is called. You will have to excuse me, I don't know all of the names of these cards, because Yeah, it's a lot of numbers when it comes to the Soviet cards. So this card, I'm sort of unsure whether to put it down in like S tier, or sorry, not S tier, C tier or B tier, just because it is a card which it's fine, if that makes sense. Like, you're getting a 6/8 for 6 with 1 operation cost. That's okay stats, and the deployment effect. Like, if you have the credits to move an attack with this, it's pretty good. However, it's just kind of expensive for what it's doing. It's a little slow. There's just better options, especially with something like Partisans or just the T-34s that stick around that you generate off of T-60s, which are better defensive cards. So, it's not a bad card, but you just have better options if you have all the cards in the game. And yeah, unless you're playing just an incredibly greedy deck, you don't really have room for this card anymore. Then you have Cossacks. Cossacks is it's a weird card. I mean, a 3-cost 3/3/0 operation cost blitz infantry. That can also it also has smokescreen, which rarely comes up, but it comes up more frequently than you might expect. Um, this is like it's a good card. However, it's not a cornerstone. It's not an auto include. I think I'm going to leave it in B tier, slightly ahead of things. If you've played the game for a while, you might remember the Cossacks Zhukov combo, or Zhukov Cossacks, I should say, because Zhukov used to say dry Soviet infantry from your deck, reduce its cost by 3 this turn. So you would run Zhukov with exclusively Cossacks, or almost exclusively Cossacks. So essentially it was a guaranteed turn 1 3/3 to the front line, which is really, really good. However, you can't do that anymore, so it's a 3-cost 3/3 to the front line, which is not terrible. Like, you can fight for the front line against a deck like US Midrange, or Jagro, or even just getting a 3/3 to the front line against air. It pressures their bombers in the support line. However, then they have a lot higher opportunity to remove it before it can attack, since it is an infantry. So B tier, nothing higher. Then we get to the Engineers Battalion. This is also going to be an A tier card. The Engineers Battalion is just absolutely insane. I'm sure if you've ever tried to play an aggressive deck and you play against an Engineers for the first time, it just feels like an uphill battle that you cannot win. Because it's difficult to remove. It's a 0/4 smokescreen, and every single time an opponent's unit dies, their HQ gains +2 health, and they have a lot of ways to make units die. If it's a mobile defense, summons 2 units that die at the end of their turn. If they confusion your unit and then your unit dies on their side of the board, that will still give them the healing off of Engineers. If they're playing a red banner to destroy a unit and summon a new one, they still get the healing off of the destroyed unit. There's just so many ways to make this card a heal like 16, 20. I've seen this card heal for like 40 in some crazy situations. And yeah, healing for 40 on a single card is really good. People run Fortification, which is 3-cost heal 7. There are some downsides, like this does take a spot in your support line, so it's difficult to run with tokens because of the no surrender. But yeah, this card is insane. Just because sometimes it can just be removed really easily, it does not gain immediate value, and healing doesn't matter if you're just being overwhelmed on board anyways. This is why this card is not an S tier. It's similar to Signal Regiment. It's better than Jasko, just because Jasko, once Jasko is removed, sort of its effect is gone. Um, like, it's a lot easier for your opponent to just not attack face or the HQ while you have a Jasko on board, and instead they spend their credits developing their own board, and then they remove your Jasko and attack into the HQ with everything, and Jasko has essentially like made your opponent play slightly differently. Whereas the Engineers, if the Engineer sticks for like 7 or 8 turns, you've probably got a ton of healing out of it. And if you're just slamming guards every turn and they're trading into the guards and not attacking HQ, you're healing off of every guard that dies, which is so it's better than Jasko, and it's probably on a similar power strength as Signal Regiment, but it's not S tier. Then we have Great Patriotic War. This is going straight up into A tier. Again, another Soviet elite that I strongly against. I was not a fan of this change. The old version of Great Patriotic War was each HQ takes half of the damage. Like, they each take half of their current health. So they each reduce in half. So if you have 8 health, it goes to 4. If you have 40 health, it goes to 20. Um, and it was not a particularly good card. I'm fine with them changing that. I was not attached to the old version of this card. However, a hard set, both HQs go to 12, is insane. Because dealing 12 damage from hand is very easy. Dealing 12 damage on board is very easy. And dealing 12 damage from hand with 6 credits, if assuming you go up to 12 credits and then you play this card and then kill them on the same turn, is incredibly easy. This is just going to mean that they have to be incredibly careful with any slightly like any type of combo card in Soviets ever, because it will always just be combined with Great Patriotic War. And that also means they have to be careful about putting combo cards into any deck, because it can just be put into a Soviet main, whatever that nation is, ally with Great Patriotic War. And we have seen multiple iterations of Soviet OTK decks since this Great Patriotic War change has gone through. And of course, it's also run in self-damage, sometimes just to heal yourself, which is often very useful. However, often it's just because your opponent heals up to like 30 or 40 health, and you have two 6/6s to the front line, and you do Great Patriotic War, and then you hit them for 12. This card, I'm not a fan of cards that just have a hard health reduction. Like, the health cap in this game is 100, so Great Patriotic War can theoretically deal 88 damage. Uh, yeah, obviously that is a bit of an extreme situation, but I'm not a fan of this card. However, I cannot deny that this card is absolutely insane and deserves a spot in A tier. It's not an S tier card because it's expensive. It can be a little clunky, because sometimes you deal damage and the opponent drops to 12 anyways, and they're just not running a deck with healing, so Great Patriotic War basically doesn't do anything. Sometimes you heal a bunch and you don't want to like lower your own health if you're not killing the opponent. Then we get to Heroes of the Soviet Union, and I think this is probably the best out of all of the choose one of 3 elites cards, so I'm going to put it up in A tier, although it will be at the bottom of A tier. And this is just because, I mean, as we've spoken, First Rifles, 272nd, Engineers, this unit I think is called the 13th Rifle. There's just so many good Soviet cards that don't cost a lot. And they just add so much value to your deck, because the Soviet elites are not based around combos generally. They're not based around like specific tempo swings, like the Schwalbe, for example, in Germany. It's just a whole bunch of like good value cards that some cost more, some cost less, but because of the variety, you're usually going to be able to pick an option for this current situation you have where you're going to be fine with it. There's very few cards off of Heroes of the Soviet Union that you never want to pick. Like the Tomahawk, but that even recently got a buff, so it's like slightly better than it used to be. The Yak, situationally, you don't want because it's small and might just die on board. The T-28 can sometimes be difficult to use, but like there's like 3 or maybe 4 units in Soviets that you don't really want to get. Which means that you're almost always guaranteed to get a card that you would probably run in your deck. Because if you've ever played a Soviet control deck, you know you run the majority of the elite units. So yeah, Heroes going up to A. Then we got the Stalin, and I mean, I gotta put the Stalin down in C tier. And you might be wondering, why is Stalin in C tier if 272nd is in S tier? And that's because 272nd costs 8, and then summons the Stalin for free. On top of the 6/6 body, the 6/6 guard body, without costing a card slot in your deck, whereas the Stalin does nothing on the turn you play it. So it has it's heavy armor 2, 1 operation cost, and the deployment, or the passive effect, when this is returned to your hand, summon a copy of it in the support line. So it essentially can't be retreated. Which is really useful, because it means your opponent can't just return it to hand with a Wrath Lightning, with an Avery, with a Leopold, whatever. They can't return it to your hand. However, what it lacks is any sort of deployment effect. It lacks Blitz, it lacks an effect on the turn you play it, and it lacks protection from cards like Lion for a Day, Dechuma, Defend in Depth, like Hammer plus anything else, Monsoon Rod. It could even just be pinned with like a Monty, an Albacore, a Shellin, whatever. This card is just incredibly slow for it. You don't want to play a 10 cost card that does nothing the turn you play it and can be removed very easily by a plethora of cards that are run in every single like aggro mid-range or control deck. Yeah. So the effect of this being on board is terrifying. However, you don't want to have to spend 10 credits to play it, which is why it's insane out of 272nd, but it's bad on its own. Then we get to ISU, which is going to go up to A tier, just because it is a unit-based AoE removal, which is pretty good in Soviets, because Soviets lack board clears, and the units they struggle with the most are typically the units that cannot be targeted by orders. The units like the Panther Gs, the King Tigers, the Tiger 1Es. Um, yeah, cards like that. So ISU just means that you throw in a Winter Warfare, and at any point in the game, if you draw those two cards, you can just do Winter Warfare, ISU, fully wipe the board, fully board reset, and that is something you really want in Soviets because they can struggle to come back. This is sort of their only comeback card. This is their version of the Leopold, their version of the To the Last Man. So because of that, it's an A tier card. Probably gonna put this above Heroes. I don't think it's quite as good as Great Patriotic War. You'll probably run it more than Great Patriotic War, but I don't think it's quite as good because it does destroy your own units. It does require running a card you would not normally run in your deck, and also that requires that card to be in hand for it to do anything. Obviously, you can just play it on its own if you have enough units to trade down, or like even just a cycle and you're using it to destroy one specific unit. Um, but it does have a handful of drawbacks. Then we get to the KV. The KV is just a ludicrously powerful card. Gonna put it here between Engineers and Great Patriotic War. Now, the KV is just such a frustrating card to play against, and it has so much potential. It is so versatile. So the effect is whenever the opponent draws a card, deal 2 damage to them. So this can be used in a lot of situations, and you probably have seen at least one of these. For example, a Britain Air deck where they go down to just 1 or 2 cards in hand, and you suspect one of them is Lend-Lease. You play a KV, now Lend-Lease means they take 8 damage. Well, it goes to their turn, and then they play Lend-Lease, so they take 10 damage. That's pretty good for a 6-drop. Or, you might be playing against Jagro, they play Feigned Retreat, discarded their entire hand, you play KV, they now have a set number of draws to find a way to kill KV in a deck that does not have a whole lot of options to remove a unit, or else they're just going to die, because KV will deal 2 damage to them each time they play a unit. Or you can use it slightly more aggressively with France Ally, where you play KV Phony War and you can draw your opponent up to 9 cards, or 8 cards plus the one they draw on their turn. So you can theoretically deal up to 18 damage burst with KV. Or you can just play it on turn 6, your opponent takes 2 damage immediately, and now they have to find a way to kill a 3/6 Heavy Armor 1 unit, which is really annoying, because it's outside of Annihilation range, it's outside of Lion for a Day range, it can be hammered, which is true. However, it has heavy armor and 6 health, which means there's very, very few units in the game that can even just kill it on its own. Like, even Leopold can't kill this. And, yeah, it 2 operation costs, it slows it down a little bit, but it can still be used to move up and attack face on top of the 2 damage every turn. This is just sort of a good card to run in value, control, aggro, mid-range, whatever KV is going to be in. It's been running Artie, it's been running self-damage, it's been running tokens, control, ramp, everything. This card is just good. Then we have Minority Recruits, which is an example of a not good card. It's probably slightly better than the Stalin, just because you can attack with it on the turn it is played. So Minority Recruits is take control of an enemy unit for 10 cost. And this is a permanent effect. However, the things that are holding it back are, 1, how taking control of enemy units works in this game is if that unit is retreated or returned to hand in any way, it will return to the person who played its hand. So if you play Minority Recruits, your 10 cost elite order gets countered by a Wrath Lightning, an Avery, a Leopold, a Half-Track, whatever. You can attack with it the turn you take it if you have the credits. However, it costs 10, and you're going to be wanting to take their largest unit, so if you take a 3 operation cost unit, you can't attack with it the turn you take it. And most importantly, Partisans exists, which is this card, but it costs 6 instead of 10, with the effect that it returns to their hand at the end of the turn. However, you combine that with Euro Factories, Red Banner, you just kill them with it, or sometimes you don't even care because you're spending 6 credits to return a unit to hand and attack with it into something else, or maybe you just take it and trade with one of their units so they both die. Yeah, Minority Recruits just gets wholly outclassed by Partisans, and even on its own, it's not that good because it's really expensive, and it just has way too many drawbacks. So then we get on to Monsantier. Monsantier is going to be another C tier card. It's interesting in theory, and it's possible that there will be a meta where Monsantier will be played. If there is a lot of decks like Alpine, for example, or maybe Tokens, where it's a specific unit type that gets buffed for being that unit type, to a lesser extent Air, where your opponent is dumping a lot of cards to buff their units, and you can use Monsantier to essentially turn all of these buffed units into non-buffed units. That's really the only situation, because otherwise it's just too difficult to use. It costs 5, so it's difficult to combine with other board clears, and most other board clears Soviets have will wipe the board anyways, like ISU, for example, or you're just going to Partisans trade 2 things. Monsanto just does not have a lot of synergies with other Soviet cards, so it's just an awkward card to use. It's pretty fun, but it's not good. However, there's a lot of room for it to be buffed in the future. There's a lot of room for it to just become better in the future as the meta changes. Then we have, rifles. Why am I blanking on the name of this card? Naval Brigade. This card is absolutely insane. This is going straight up to S tier. And I would actually put it ahead of 272nd Guards, just because 272nd Guards is a little vulnerable to just being retreated with half-track, Leopold, Jagdbomber, etc., etc., etc. Whereas the Naval Brigade does something the turn it is played, and what it does is insane. So it is a 4/4 ambush guard for 6 infantry, which is already just like not a terrible stat line. You would expect it to do something, but it's not a terrible stat line. And what it does is destroy a damaged enemy unit, targeted, which is a 4-cost effect, as seen in critical hit. So it's like a 2-cost 4/4 ambush guard, plus a critical hit, plus draw a card, since those are 2 effects in one, so you have to include draw a card in there. So this card is worth probably like 8 or 9 credits, which checks out because if you compare this to Decima, which is a 2/4 ambush guard that destroys a targeted unit in the support line, this can hit anywhere on the board, but it has to be damaged. However, you're playing the Soviets, so you're probably running 4 sickles, you might be running Winter Warfares, you can even just trade a unit. There's some token generation in there to have 1/1 tokens to attack into things. It's really easy to damage an enemy unit as Soviets, and the additional benefit of this is it's not an order. So again, those annoying units to deal with as Soviets, the B-17Fs, the Panther Gs, the Tiger 1Es, those annoying units to deal with, you can just remove it with a Naval Brigade. This also targets any unit type, so Soviets can often struggle to deal with air units, since they have cards like Hammer is typically the best unit to use. So Sickle Naval Brigade can take out any air unit in the game, essentially. So yeah, just an incredibly powerful tempo tool. This card has been run in virtually every single Soviet deck since it came out. It's not currently run in self-damage, and it wasn't run in Audi just because those decks are a little too aggressive to want this. It's a tempo card, but it's a little bit too much control-oriented to be run in the most aggressive Soviet decks. However, that does not take away from this card being absolutely insane, because just fully destroying a unit for 6 cost, and you can save it for the largest unit in your opponent's deck. Again, this can be duplicated by Heroes of the Soviet Union. We'll get to it in coming up, but this can be duplicated by Parade. Man, Soviets just have some crazy elites. Then we get to Night Witches, which I'm going to put in B tier. I'll have to make a video on it someday, but Night Witches used to be a very, very different card, and it used to be my favorite card in the game, if you were new to cards. But that is not the time to talk about it now. Night Witches currently is 3 cost, add 3 Polycarpovs to your hand, and these Polycarpovs are 1/2 bombers with the destruction effect added from the people to your hand, which is the 3 cost deal 3 damage to an enemy unit. So essentially, this is like 6 cards in one. However, it is 6 cards you would not run on your own, like on their own in a competitive deck. It's 6 pretty mediocre cards on their own. However, it's still 6 cards in one. So this is just like sort of one of the peak of value generation cards in the game. Obviously, it's not quite as insane as like Research, and it's not quite as useful as 272nd or First Rifles. However, Night Witches is an incredibly powerful value card if that is what you were looking for. The problem is we're not really in a value meta. We have not been in a value meta in a very long time. We are in a tempo meta, and that's likely the way the game is going to stay since people enjoy playing tempo decks way more than they enjoy playing value decks, so they're going to make tempo decks better than value decks. Um, but with that being said, Night Witches, it's an okay card because it only takes up 1 card slot, and Soviets often lack draw. So depending on what ally nation you're running with Soviets, you might have actually no draw. So Night Witches sort of is a good card to make up for the fact that you don't have a lot of draw. Despite it costing 3, it is not a card that is easily used early in the game because of hand space concerns, because you spend 3 and you put 3 cards into your hand, and you need to spend another 3 to get those 3 cards out onto the board. Um, so, yeah, I mean, it's an okay card. I think I would put it up. Um, yeah, I think I would leave it here, slightly behind Cossacks. Then we get to Parade, and Parade is going to be up into an A tier card. I mean, it's not flashy. We're going to leave it at the bottom of A tier. Maybe slightly ahead of Heroes. Um, and what makes Parade so crazy is think about the card Convoy. Convoy is probably the best draw card in the game, just in terms of efficiency. It's 1.5 credits per draw. Pretty good. And generally speaking, you also want your draw cards to be cheaper. Um, because you don't, like, if you had 1.5 credits to draw, but it's like 12 cost, draw 8 or something, um, like, you're never going to use that. So, yeah, Convoy, one of the best, most efficient draw cards in the game. And Parade is a 3 cost, draw a unit from your deck, duplicate it. So, it is essentially, it's a 3 cost, draw 2. However, it's a 3 cost to draw 2 that generates value, and again, that is the sort of the theme of the best Soviet elite cards, is they just generate an obscene amount of value. And on top of it being a draw 2, but you're only actually drawing 1 from your deck, so you're getting more out of your deck, you're getting less into fatigue, which is often going to matter in control mirrors. On top of all of that, it's drawing a unit, so it's drawing a specific card from your deck. I mean, unit is it's still a pretty broad category, but it's not going to be drawing you orders. It's not going to be drawing you countermeasures. And sometimes that can be good, sometimes that can be bad. Like, you might be in a situation where you're like, oh, I need a Winter Warfare to clear the board, but Parade can't draw it. However, it means that you're going to be duplicating units, and units typically give you more value than orders in Soviets. So, like, just look at some of the other units in this tier list, because most of the cards at the top of the tier list so far are the units. You're going to be running the First Rifles. You're going to be running a Naval Brigade. You're going to be running 272nd. You're probably running 13th. Engineers, I mean, even Parade into Engineers, you might not think it's that great, but having 2 Engineers, 1 to survive the first way your opponent has to kill it, or even 2 on the board at the same time. Every time a unit dies, you heal 4. Duplicating the KV, like, it's just so many annoying units, and you have a very good chance of hitting an elite just because of how many elite units you run in your deck. And oftentimes that's enough to catch your opponent off guard because you rarely play around your opponent having 2 copies of the same elite. You can even easily hit 3 copies of the same elite. I'm sure you've tried beating a Soviet control deck once, and then they hit Parade into 272nd, and then play a 272nd, and then they play Heroes of the Soviet Union and play a third 272nd, and you just want to cry because your opponent has now played 3 6/6 units with destruction, summon a Stalin. Yeah, or just you play Parade on 3 and you hit First Rifles, and you play First Rifles on 4 and 5, and it's the best 4 cost card in the game, and it's probably the best 5 cost card in the game, played as for 4. Yeah, Parade is just a really good card that it can be caught in control, and you probably don't want to run this outside of control, just because it can be a little slow. I mean, even people run this in self-damage, and I think that's fine. But yeah, Parade's just a great card. Then we get to Red Banner. Red Banner is going to go into B tier. It's a very powerful card. It destroy a friendly unit, um, summon a unit from the same nation that costs 2 more. Now, there's a couple situations where you can't play this. Like, you cannot play it if there is no unit from the same nation that costs 2 more. However, there is a lot of units where it is one unit that costs 2 more, in which case this red banner is destroy the unit, summon this specific unit, and those specific units tend to be really, really good. So, for example, if you play this on an 8 cost US unit, which is pretty easy to do, you play an Avenger, which is a decent card, and then you play a red banner on it. So you're turning, you get the deployment effect out of the Avenger, and then you turn the 4/4 bomber into either a Persian or a B-17F, both of which have blitz. So then, if you have the credits, you can also then attack with it. Or you can play Partisans on your opponent's Leopold. You attack with your opponent's Leopold, and then you play Red Banner on it, and it turns into a King Tiger guaranteed. So you have now turned your opponent's Leopold into 6 damage and a King Tiger. So that's insane. You can turn 272nd Guards into 2 Stalins. You can turn a 34th Guards and self-damage into either 272nd Guards or the 6/7 Guard that summons the token every turn. There is a lot of usages for Red Banner. The reason I have it in B tier is it is combined with other cards most of the time to be good. On its own, sometimes it can just get stuck in your hand because you don't want to, like, you're stuck in the early game where all you have is like 3 drops and 4 drops, and you don't want to play a red banner because there's tons of 5 drops and 6 drops in the game, so there's a huge amount of variance. Most of them are bad, so you don't want to destroy a good unit that you choose to run in your deck that is on board and turn it into a random unit that has a high chance of being something worse than the unit you already had. So yeah, it can get stuck in your hand because you usually need a large amount. Like it's a late game card despite it costing 2, and it's a late game card that relies on specific situations. However, those specific situations happen frequently, and its effect in those situations is insane, which is why it's still a very good card. However, not quite as up to the same power level as the A tier cards. Then we have Road to Berlin. Um, this card is difficult to place. I think I'm going to put it down into. Uh, I mean, I think I'm going to leave it in B tier. Between Night Witches and the 6th Airborne. And the reason Road to Berlin, so the effect is it's a 1-cost order. For the rest of the game, your opponent's HQ gains, when this takes 3 damage, the enemy HQ gains +3. So essentially, whenever your opponent takes 3 damage on their turn or on your turn, you heal 3. So it's, when this came out, there was a lot of talk about, will this replace Engineers? Because Engineers can be removed, this can't be removed. Engineers shows up when you play cards like Parade or Zukov, etc., that maybe you don't want it showing up with, whereas Road to Berlin does not. However, it's a lot easier of a situation to have a unit die while you're losing than it is to deal 3 damage to the opponent while you're losing, and when you are losing is the time where you most want healing. And there's essentially self-damage is the only deck in the game that's damaging itself, as the name implies, enough that you are going to be healing on their turns. So yeah, it's sort of a situation where if you're hitting your opponent in the HQ for 3, you probably don't care about health. Now, there are situations where you will. So for example, against like a resistance player, for example, or like a unitless deck where they're turtling, they're letting you attack them, they're healing for a ton, and they're trying to set up some like big combo. And this is just meaning that you heal 3 every time they let you attack, and every time they to stop you from attacking. It's a turn where they're not drawing cards, setting up combo pieces, etc., etc. So it's a really good card against combo decks. I'd say the most use I see out of this card, and I feel like this is going to be the same situation with me talking about Isolation, where I say it, and then somebody like wins an OCC with it. I see the most use out of this card, and this is a use I've tried to sort of push in the past, with Fatigue. Trying to build a Fatigue deck, because every time your opponent takes 3 damage or more on Fatigue, it's you heal 3. So essentially it just means that you are like 3 ahead in Fatigue than your opponent, regardless of actual Fatigue, just because you're healing 3 every time they take Fatigue damage. So if you can build like a really grindy deck, maybe with Phony Wars, maybe not. Maybe you just don't run a lot of card draw and just try to grind your opponent out, similar to unitless, but obviously you would run a lot more units because you're Soviets. And then you just run Road to Berlin as sort of like this additional help once you reach fatigue. That seems like a pretty good use for it, but that's very niche and it's not really supported at the moment. So it's a good card if you have it and you don't have engineers. You can throw Road to Berlin into your deck because sometimes you will hit your opponent for 3, and sometimes that healing will matter. But it's a little bit too much of a win more card, and it's a little difficult to trigger for it to be the top tier competitive at the moment. Then we have Siberian Transfer. This is going to go into B tier as well, sort of same reason as the 6th Airborne. I mean, obviously this is the Siberian Transfer OTK. However, the effect of this card, it's really expensive, shockingly, and dealing 5 damage is not that great. So, for example, it's 6 cost to deal 5 to the support line, which is just not that great. It's 4 cost to deal 5 to the front line, which you're getting slightly better, but it is an attack rather than a direct targeting order. So heavy armor factors in, guard factors in. Now, obviously, the benefit of these cards, same as 6th Airborne, is that you run it with a Red Banner or a Ural Factory. So you turn this 5/5 tank that will die at the end of your turn into a unit after getting the attack in. But that takes a lot of credits, especially after the nerfs to Red Banner and Ural Factories from 1 to 2 each. That is sort of indirectly hurt Siberian Transfer. So it's difficult to run outside of OTK, and I don't think the OTK deck is that great. However, again, it's just an okay card. Like, this is a lot better than other nations' elites that are, like, not run. Like, this isn't actively bad. Like, if you have this in your deck, it's not going to actively harm your deck. I just think it's probably slightly worse than just running a hammer in a control deck at a competitive level. But if you have this card and you want to play it because it's an elite, go for it. Then we have T38, or not 38, 28. This card, I think, has a lot of untapped potential, but it's kind of difficult to use. So I'm going to put it maybe behind Night Witches and before, well, no. I think between Road to Berlin and the 6th Airborne. So what T28 does, and it's a little confusing, is it's a 2/3 smokescreen blitz tank with the effect Pincer. When this unit dies, put it onto the top of your deck. So what this means is, if you play the T28, you pincer something, and then you attack with it and it dies because of the, like, you blitz it out and you kill it, it will now be the top card of your deck, so you draw it again next turn. So you can just keep if you have a unit on board to pincer with, it can theoretically be an infinite 2/3 blitz if you also have a unit to trade it into. Now that's pretty slow. Like, if you have a unit on the board and your opponent has units on the board, you're trading, dealing 2 damage to it every turn at the expense of drawing a different card in your deck is not that great. However, what that means is every time that it dies and it goes to the top of your deck, or the unit you pincer it on dies and goes to the top of your deck, is a time you are not drawing a card, which fits into the fatigue style of a potential grinder deck that Soviets could have, and have had in the past. They didn't run T28, but I think it's possible that the card could be good. I mean, I pick this card off of Heroes of the Soviet Union every now and then, and it has won games off of that. So based on that, I could see this card being run in a specific type of meta, or as a counter to specific decks in the future that might, sort of like, Soviets can go toe-to-toe on value, and then you use this to win on fatigue. And obviously, you don't have to. It's a pincer effect, so it's not just the T28 that gains this effect. The unit you play it on also gains this effect. So that means you can have a 272nd on board, you play T28, and then you play like Red Banner, or you play T28 and then you just trade in with the 272nd. Then you get the Stalin, you get the Blitz T28 on the board that can now attack and trade or whatever, and then you get a second 272nd onto the top of your deck. So yeah, the T28 is value generation, it's fatigue stopping. However, it's just a little clunky. Then we get to Tomahawk. This is going into D tier. This is just a subpar card. It's 3 cost, 2/3. Whenever a friendly infantry is deployed, and it's since been changed to deployed or summoned. So cards like No Surrender or Armored Train, etc. Those units that are being summoned will also gain +1/+1. They all get +1/+1. However, if you're running a tokens deck, this is a unit in the support line. It costs 3 for a passive +1/+1 effect on units you play after that. That is just so slow compared to other cards they have. So they have the motor rifles, which is a deployment to give current units on the board +1/+1. They have frontal assault, which is 2 cost to give you light infantry on the board +1/+2. Like Alliance, we can do it. There's just way better buff options and that don't take up slots in the support line, that aren't clunky to use. This has 2 operation cost for some reason. I believe, actually. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, Tomahawk is just not going to be running tokens, and tokens is not a good deck, and it's not going to be running anything outside of tokens, and it's just not a good enough tokens card. Even if tokens was good, you wouldn't run this card. Then we get to Tractor Factories, and this is a card which you might all think I'm going to put it into A tier, maybe even S tier. This card is seen a lot. I'm going to put this into B tier, actually behind Red Banner. So the reason I'm doing this is I don't think Tractor Factories is actually that good. A lot of people run it, and it has been run in almost every Soviet control deck basically since it came out. Not quite since it came out, because I think it came out at 9 cost, and also Soviet control just wasn't that good. But it's since been lowered to 8 cost, and its effect is summoned to T-34s, which is the 5/5 Blitz tank, and these ones do not die at the end of your turn, which is nice. However, it's still 12 credits to play this and then attack into the support line with one of the tanks. You can't attack with both of the tanks unless it's both into the front line for 12 credits without additional ramp. So it's not that this is a bad card, it's just really, really slow, and you have better value generating options that aren't as awful. Because if you're playing against like an aggro deck, you don't want to play turn 8 credit card that does nothing the turn you play it, and it does not have guard, it does not heal you, it does not remove anything, it does not even threaten much, it's just 5/5 tanks with no effect. Yeah, this card is terrible against aggro. And you just have better value generating options that are not as bad against aggro. So like I'm not saying people are wrong to have run this card in the past. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I've definitely been cutting it from my Soviet control lists recently. However, this is a card that is going to be outclassed by almost anything in the future, so do not expect Tractor Factories to stick around. It's just a really mediocre card. Like, for example, T60 generates T-34s into your hand, and then you can play them, and obviously you do lose a slight effect, because playing a T-34, it is 5 per, whereas this is 8, so you're sort of taking a 10 cost of playing units down to 8 cost, so you're saving 2 credits. Plus, it's 2 tanks in 1, so it's sort of also drawing a card. However, you would not run those cards in your deck normally, whereas the T60 is like a guard that generates a 5/5 that you can play on 5 and then attack later, or on 9 where you can play in double attack, whereas Tractor Factories, you're stuck up needing at least 8 credits to play with it, and 12 to attack into the support line, so it's just so slow compared to other options. So despite everybody running it, this might be my hottest take in the Soviet control list. Let me know what you guys think. I'm putting it in B tier. Then we get Armored Train. Armored Train, this might actually be another shock to a lot of people. I'm going to put up in A tier. I think Armored Train is just an incredibly good guard and like just stall out card. So it's a 3/7 tank guard with heavy armor 1, which is already just pretty good stat line. And at the end of your turn, every turn, it will summon a 1/1 token, and it used to be summon a 1/1 token immediately to the right of it, which meant you could not ever play it on the left side of your HQ, because it would summon a 1/1 token between the guard and your HQ. However, it has since been changed, so it now summons the 1/1 token on the far right of your board. It summons the 1/1 token in the same line that the unit is in. So if you move the unit to the front line, it will summon it in the front line. However, it has 5 operation cost, and the text cannot attack. However, you are fine not attacking if you have a 3/7 heavy armor tank that summons units that can attack every turn, and 1/1 units that operate for free, and trade down very easily into, like, 1/1s, or 2/1s, or 3/1s. Like, there's just a lot of 1 health units where, like, pings will even, like, soften something up. It will deal damage to set up a naval brigade. And yeah, you just play this on 5, and odds are your opponent's going to have an incredibly difficult time dealing with it, especially if you played First Rifles on 4. Like, First Rifles is a 6/9 in stats, maybe you can argue it's a 3/9 since its 3 attack is split across 2 bodies, so you never actually have 6 attack at any given time. I mean, 3/9, this is a 3/7, but has heavy armor 1, which is worth at least 2 health, usually. Armored Train, just a great card to stall out aggro decks, and yeah, stalling out aggro decks is pretty important in Control. When you think about, I don't know, Germany, for example, they have no guards. Well, essentially no guards. If you think about US, they have no guards. This is just an incredibly powerful tool at denying aggro. Um, the ability to just beat you down. And you can easily like protect like a KV behind it afterwards or something. The ones it generates all are fodder for healing 2 off of the engineers. There's just a lot of internal synergy between the Soviet elites that work really well. So yeah, Armored Train in A tier, Tractor Factories in B tier, fight me. Then we get to Upgrade, which is possibly the worst elite in the game. And Upgrade was intended to be the sort of part 3 to the Red Banner Ural Factories story. Upgrade is a 2-cost, destroy a friendly tank, summon a new tank that costs 3 more from the same nation. Pretty fancy. You can play this on a Befelswagen or a 35T to summon a Panther G, among other options. Um, However, that the Soviet tank aggro is not good, and if it was good, it probably would not be on a card which destroys one of your tanks and summons a random tank that is slightly larger stats. Um, Now, you might think that the flagship combo for this card would be the Siberian Transfer, the 6th Airborne, all these cards that summon 5/5 T-34s that die at the end of your turn. And you want to red banner them into 7 drops, or Ural Factory them into 6 drops, or upgrade them into 8 drops. However, if you go to your collection, you select Show All, and you go to 8-cost Soviet tanks, you will see that there is none. You cannot play upgrade on T-34. You yeah, whether they die at the end of the turn or not, you can't play upgrade on T-34. The vast majority of Soviet tanks are cost 5. Like, they've pushed to T-34 synergy decks. However, all the T-34s cost 5, so you can't upgrade them. Even if you have played a Soviet tank deck, which is bad, you, like, actively do not want upgrade in your deck because it has 0 synergy with the only Soviet tank deck that is even pushed in the game. This card is just mind-blowingly bad. It is awful. It would be better if it summoned a tank that cost 2. Um, Actually, is that even true? Is there even any 7-cost tanks? Um, ISU used to cost 7, but now it costs 9. KV costs 6. I don't even think there's any. No, no. There is the There was one. There's a KV. There's a. There's like, or not a. Is it a KV? Yeah, there's a KV like the KV2 or something. It's like a 6/5 heavy armor 2, can't be attacked by plane or can't be targeted by planes or artillery or something like that. It's a pretty good card. So yeah, if upgrade was upgraded into something that costs 2, it would be better than it costing 3. It would not be rot. It would still be awful, but it would be way better. Then we get to Winter Offensive. This is a 8-cost Soviet order. Deal 4 damage to all. So this includes your units, their units, both HQs. Now, this is actually an A tier card because the difference between 3 and 4 is pretty big, like comparing to Kyber Bomb. And dealing 4 damage to the enemy HQ is a pretty good way to finish off a game, considering that Soviets do not have a ton of burn. And it has a decent amount of natural synergy with your decks. So, for example, you have a lot of destruction effects. Like, you have low stat units with destruction effects that generate value, whether in your hand or on the board. So, Winter Offensive might destroy your units. However, it might. It's not necessarily losing as much value out of your cards, even if you are destroying your own units with it, as in other nations. Plus, Road to Berlin. If you have Road to Berlin up and you play Winter Offensive, you only take 1 damage because they take 4 and then you heal 3. So yeah, there's just a lot of sort of natural, tidy synergies with Winter Offensive, on top of the effect just being pretty good, especially because it is a board clear. It's a pretty good board clear, and Soviets lack board clears. So yeah, Winter Offensive, A tier, not a whole lot else to say. Then we have Yak. Yak is also going into A tier. Now, exactly where into A tier, it's a little hard to say. I'd say probably between Winter Offensive and Parade. Although I might actually move Train above Parade. So, The Yak is it's a weird card. So it's a 2-cost 2/2 fighter. At the start of your turn, draw a card and deal 1 damage to yourself. Um, Drawing a card is incredibly useful. It's one of the best just card texts you can have on something. Drawing cards is really good because it gives you more options. Taking 1 damage to your HQ, not a big deal if you only have it happen once or twice. And if you're in self damage, it's actively good, which is why Yak is incredibly good in self damage. However, there's a few worries just because you can't control the number of cards you draw, you can't control the amount of damage you have. Sometimes you play this card and your opponent just doesn't kill it. They don't play units. They don't give you a way to kill it off, and then suddenly you're overdrawing and you're like taking 3, 4, 5, 6 damage to your HQ from your own card, and you're getting really low on health, and it's a little concerning. Or they leave it around too long and you draw 4 or 5 cards and means you lose in the fatigue match, or you lose in the fatigue like 20 turns later just because you do so many extra cards off of this Yak. Um, yeah, I mean, so it's a little difficult to use in certain situations. It's a little difficult to use in certain control decks. The 2 health means that it can just get farmed by aggro, so it's not exactly like the most auto-include in control, but it's insane in self-damage, and self-damage is insane, and it's otherwise good in basically any Soviet deck you ran this in Arty. Yeah, it's just a good card. It's a cheap card that draws you a card as long as it stays on the board, so it's sort of like 22nd infantry. Um, and if you're using this in a deck with a lot of cheap cards, and presumably your other cheap cards are have synergies with your deck, so they might be even more threatening than the Yak. This can draw you a lot of cards and can be sort of the fuel to your aggro deck. Um, and let me just move my webcam down here since we're actually getting we have so many A tier cards. I'm starting to cover them up. And last but not least, there is Zhukov. And Zhukov is going here. It is another A tier card. Zhukov is absolutely insane. I was kind of against this change. I was fine with changing Zhukov, don't get me wrong. Zhukov used to be very high roller, was the draw Soviet elite from your deck, or sorry, Soviet infantry from your deck, reduce its cost by 3, which let you do turn 1 Cossacks sometimes. Its current form is draw Soviet infantry from your deck, give it +1/+1 and a blitz in hand for when you play it. This is absolutely insane because if you look at the best 3 like the S tier cards, they're all Soviet infantry. If you look at the A tier card, which might be an S tier card, it's also a Soviet infantry. Soviet just has a lot of infantry that are like basically the only Soviet infantry you're running, almost, is elites. There's the 845th you might be running in control, and if you're running this in self damage, you have the 456th and the 34th guards, but that's fine because hey, a 7/7 blitz for 0 is pretty good. So yeah, it's a tutor effect for 1 that also buffs the unit significantly. This card is just absolutely insane and will be run in almost every Soviet deck until the end of time. It's like even similar to Monty in that way. Not in terms of the effect it has on the game, because obviously Monty is a very different card than Zhukov, but it is similar to Monty in just the absolutely insane card that is just 1 mana draw card, getting a huge upside, and it will be run in basically every single deck regardless of its archetype. And that is the end of the Soviet elites. Let me know what you think of my tier list. Let me know if you agree, disagree, or any other thoughts on this. And you can join my Discord, where you can post your own tier list. There is a link. There is a specific channel even just for tier lists, where you can there's a link to make your own. You can post your own. You can discuss about others. And yeah, other than that, like the video, share, subscribe, YouTube things. And I won't ask you what tier list you want to see next, because we are left with only one. It is, of course, the Britain tier list. That one's going to be fun. Everybody loves a Britain. But I will say, if you want to see more tier lists outside of just elites, let me know. Or if you want to see the like sort of the mothership of tier lists, the all nation elites tier list, where I rate them together. That might be fun, although surely very time consuming. But I'll leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.